Hello, it's Spirit House. Tonight I'm reading from The Message of the Divine Iliad by Walter Russell. Excuse me. And we are in part 2 of volume 1, which is titled 10 Lectures. And we are on lecture number 10, which is titled Secret of Man's Power. I shall read 4 excerpts from the Divine Iliad as my text for tonight's talk on the subject of man's source of power. Quote, "When they shall know the light of me in them, then they shall be me and I them. When man knows light, then he will know no limitations, but man must know the light for himself, and none there can be who can make words of it. For light knows light, and there need be no words. Wherefore I say to thee, exalt thou thyself beyond thy sensing. Know me as fulcrum of thy thinking, and be me as deep well of thy knowing. Until then he is but moving clay, manifesting not me in him, while sensing not but moving clay of him, knowing not my light in him." Unquote. Every man wants to be great and powerful. The most important thing for any man to know who wishes to express power in his own relationship to is his willingness. The most important thing for any man to know who wishes to express power is his own relationship to the universe. Until he does know this relationship, he is like a blind weakling seeking his own way through the dark. His power is measured by the extent to which he knows his relationship to his universe. It is also limited to that measure. Man's supreme error lies in thinking of himself as an individual unit of creation. Practically the whole mass of mankind believes that each man is a power unto himself, independent of anything else in the universe. Each believes himself to be an individual entity whose thinking is his own, confined within his own brain, and who has power of his own within himself to act. Very few think of themselves as utterly helpless in themselves. Very few know that they are as dependent upon their Creator for even the slightest of their actions as an electric light bulb is upon a generator from which it extends. The relationship between the electric light bulb and its generator, from which it draws its power, is exactly the same as the relationship between man and God, man's only source of power. An electrician is thoroughly aware of the fact that he cannot get any light whatsoever if he disconnects his bulb from its generator. To give light, it must be connected. To get more powerful lights from his generator, he must know how to make each individual bulb stronger and more powerful. It is only through such knowledge that the electrical engineer can multiply the power of a small candle power light to the candle power of a searchlight. Likewise, the only way a man can multiply his own power from mediocrity to genius is to become thoroughly aware of the one supreme universal fact that God alone is, and that nothing is existent but God. He who knows this knows that he of himself is nothing, but is all-powerful because of the Father abiding in him. Any man who knows the source of his existence without reservation as to his own independent existence is already omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent. The illumined ones alone have this knowledge in its fullness. Only such men can say with full cognizance of its meaning, quote, I can of mine own self do nothing. The Father within me doeth the work. Unquote. Jesus alone, of all men ever born on earth, could say this with as full a certainty of its meaning as the electrical engineer could say, these bulbs have no light in them. They can do nothing of themselves. Whatever light comes from them is extended to them from their source. It is not their own light. It's that which is in their generator. Quote unquote. Jesus knew God as the one fulcrum of the entire wave universe. He knew the nothingness, the unreality of this mind-imagined thought universe which only seems to be. Jesus knew the orderliness of law and the processes of creation. In fact, he was the world's only consummate scientist. Because of his scientific knowledge, he was fully aware of all creating things as being extensions of each other, all being one, all being the imaginings of mind under control of mind. It was this knowledge which gave him the power to heal and to perform the so-called miracles attributed to him. Jesus was, therefore, the greatest man who ever lived because he had greater knowledge than any man who ever lived. Knowledge is the key that unlocks man's door to cosmic power. The more any man knows, the more powerful he is or can become. Many of us tried to emulate the example of Jesus with the idea of goodness in mind. Goodness or virtue alone will not make any man great, godlike, or powerful. Goodness in any individual is the result of action according to God's law. Man must know God's law of love within his heart and soul before he can live love. Emulation or imitation alone cannot make a man great. A man must know within himself the nature of God and God's processes of creation. When we speak of brotherly love, we must know its scientific meaning in respect to the unity of the entire physical body of creation, as well as the unity of the spiritual universe of God. Jesus lived the principle of brotherly love with scientific knowledge of the unity of man. He knew the oneness of the omniscient light, from which all things are extended to manifest the love principle of unity. He knew also the unity of the electric wave universe of seeming many parts, and the balanced interchange of giving and re-giving which manifests the love principle in matter. To him there were no other men on earth than his self, that all seemingly separate other men were his own self, his own body, all being extensions of himself as his arms were extensions of his body. He had not even the concept of separateness, for he knew the wholeness of God and his one idea. His very idea of the brotherhood of man had no connotation of multiplicity in it. To him, brotherhood of man meant wholeness of man as one. When he said, "Love thy brother as thyself and love thine enemies," he did not think of the words brother and enemies as being other persons. He could not, for the oneness of the Father was in him. Plurality simply did not exist in his consciousness. The sum total of Jesus' knowledge transcended matter. To him, man's material body was unreal, his spirit alone being real, while to unillumined humans, man's body is real, being presumably controlled by spirit. Jesus was all that God is. He was the light of God's all-knowing. Because of that fact, Jesus could knowingly say, "I and my Father are one." How few there have ever been who could say that knowingly. Perhaps none other than Jesus. We teach the oneness of God and man in principle, and we include it in all of our religious and metaphysical literature as fundamentals. But who among men can divorce matter, multiplicity of mankind, and the ego of individuality from his concepts of unity? Man is sense-bound. Only the greatest geniuses can transcend the senses and forget the body for a sufficient length of time to become aware of God in them for the purpose of interpreting God's mighty rhythms. Jesus was never for one moment unaware of God and him as one. He forever transcended the sense of his electric body. He was wholly mind, wholly omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent. God is love unexpressed. God's creation is love expressed. God's love is changeless unity. God's creation is his imagined division of his unity into pairs of changing opposite units, multiplied to infinity, for the purpose of manifesting the power of love through interchange between opposite pairs. Love is the one supreme whole idea of God. Desire to express love is the supreme power of God. Knowledge of how to express the power of love makes any man who has that knowledge supreme over other men. The divinity of any man is the measure of the light of love in him. The power of any man is the measure of desire to express his divinity. The greatness of any man is the measure of his ability to express love in his human relations in the manner in which God expresses love in nature. God is balance. God expresses his power in nature by balancing his opposed pairs. Creation consists of two unbalanced electrical conditions which forever seek balance in each other to manifest the unconditioned unity of balance from which they extend as moving waves. God expresses his whole idea of love in nature electrically by rhythmic balanced interchange of love between all pairs of electric opposites in his imagined universe of multiple units of his one idea. Rhythmic balanced interchange between pairs of opposite conditions is God's one law. by means of which all effects of nature, or in man's world of human relations, are produced. God holds this one law inviolate in all effects of cause. God always balances all of his effects of interchange in his creating universe. Man persistently unbalances so many of his effects of interchange with other men that balance is impossible for him. All man's ills, his failures, enmities, worries, fears, diseases, and wars are the result of breaking that inviolate law. The extent to which man breaks God's law is the measure in which he himself is broken. Civilization is a gradual unfolding of the comprehension of the nature of God and the processes of nature working out its complexities of effects under the one law of love. Civilization progresses in the measure of that comprehension, exemplified in its great men. Its great men are those who know. I'm recording something. Thanks. Okay. Its great men are those who know God in them and interpret his rhythms in accord with law. Its great men are always few. Those few constantly uplift other men by a constant raising of the standards of world culture. When there are too few men living knowingly with God, civilization becomes decadent. The world is in one of its decadent periods now because of that fact. Material-minded men have conceived greatness to lie in the expression of physical and mental power over other men, and in the material power of possessions. Mankind has not been demonstrating the principle of love for his fellow man. Men and nations have sought to enrich themselves with material possessions in utter defiance of the law of love. Men whom the world has considered great have been godless men who ruled kingdoms with iron hands and gathered together large amounts of gold and other material possessions. Others whom we have considered great were those who delved into the secrets of chemistry and electricity to produce the material for enriching empire builders of industry for self-enrichment. Greatness in man has been associated with money and material power. Many there have been of this kind, whose names are forgotten in a few generations, but few there have been of such immortals such as Wagner, Beethoven, Rachmaninoff, Shakespeare, Socrates, Leonardo, or Michelangelo. These are the men who uplift the whole human race because they work knowingly with God, while those who work for self alone pull the standard of civilization down to lower levels. This generation is not producing such spiritually great men as even 2 generations ago. Such men as Longfellow, Whittier, Milton, Emerson, Scott, Dickens, Blake, Tennyson, and Poe. Side note, remember this was written in 1949. Even the last generation produced such musicians, poets, writers, painters, and sculptors as Victor Herbert, Sibelius, Rachmaninoff, Elizabeth and Robert Browning, Walt Whitman, Mark Twain, Kipling, Markham, Masefield, Augustus St. Gaudens, Daniel French, Frederick MacMonnies, George Clay Bernard, Edward Burne-Jones, Keats, Whistler, Ennis, John Sargent, Monet, and hosts of other geniuses in the art, here and abroad. When so many geniuses lived contemporarily, world culture arose to high points to direct man's thinking into spiritual channels. Where are their equal today? We are not producing them at all. All of our arts are decadent. Ugliness has taken the place of beauty. In painting and sculpture, the ugliness of unwholesome thinking and practicing has flooded the land with the distorted works of men whose personal appearance and manner of living are as decadent as are their works. Beauty and dignity can come only from the creators whose inspired lives are dominated by love of beauty. This generation can count all too few such men. Those who have set high standards for past salons have died. The salons which they made into temples of beauty are fast becoming tombs for art's decadence. In no department of life has decadence of morality been felt more keenly than in religion. The reason for this deplorable condition is because dogmatic and creedal religions have outgrown their usefulness in this electric age of greater comprehension. The old hellfire and brimstone of orthodoxy no longer frightens people into being good. Orthodoxy, such as it was, held people to a greater practice of religious devotion than it possibly could in these more enlightened days. The God of love is replacing the God of fear in man's concepts. 50 years ago, practically the entire population went to church, and the child who did not attend Sunday school was rare. Today, 60 million people in this country do not regularly attend any church, and a very large percentage of children do not attend Sunday school. That does not mean that people are less desirous of religion. It means that creeds and doctrines which have been inherited from pagan days are no longer applicable to this more enlightened generation. Sin has different connotation in this electric age. People no longer can be convinced that the naturalness of birth is sinful. Because of the many beliefs of early day religious teachings, over 100 different disunited creedal religions sprang into being. The world is on its way to finding unity. A disunited church can never unify mankind. A church which depicts the nature of God as any other than love cannot exist. The God of anger, who must be appeased by sacrifice for the remission of man's sins, appeals to the ignorant, but not to the intellectual. The comprehension of man has risen far above man's willingness to accept such concepts. We have come to the 11th hour in our civilization where God's law of love must rule all mankind. We must have one world and one religion of love. Until the law is lived by all men, we shall continue to produce materialistic men who destroy world unity. We are at a crucial point where the whole world must produce great men who know God in them, men who manifest the love principle upon which the universe is founded, or perish. The world concepts of values and human relations must change from accent upon money and material possessions, which are transient, to accent upon spiritual values, which are eternal. The material-minded man who seeks gold can obtain more gold by working with the law of love than without it. Excuse me. This he does not know. New comprehension born of the spiritual awakening arising from New Age teaching will gradually transform man's concepts of power and greatness. The principles of human relations must be reversed from the practice of taking for material self-enrichment to the practice of giving for mutual enrichment. He who thus acquires treasures of the earth will simultaneously acquire treasures of the heaven. The dread serpent of fear out of our neighbors, which forces us to lock doors, police streets, and arm nation against nation, will disappear only through the complete reversal of human relationship practices to conform to nature's law of love. When one obeys the law and gives of himself to his fullest extent, the law will unfailingly work to re-give in equal measures that which he has given. Nature unfailingly observes this law in both action and reaction. Rains from the heavens given to the earth for its needs are re-given to the heavens by unfolding forests and other growths which the heavens needs to produce new moisture. Consider how the law of rhythmic balanced interchange would work in industry. A shoe manufacturer, for instance, considering his own interests, restricts the credit of a customer who is in financial difficulty. Practice of the love principle by the manufacturer would be demonstrated by him in sending his efficiency expert to consult with his customer and help him find a way to overcome his trouble. The expert may find him carrying too high-priced shoes for the neighborhood and advise a sale of different grade shoes made suitable for his neighborhood needs. Instead of losing a customer by assisting and crushing him, the manufacturer would have continued to keep a customer by solving his financial problems through extension of the love principle. In addition to the values in money received by the manufacturer, he has the loyal friendship of the man to whom he has extended love. This is the priceless This is the priceless asset which does not go down on the books of earth, but is unfailingly written upon the records of each man's soul for eternal repetition. When man adds the priceless love asset to each of his dealings with other men, he will be adding universal power unto himself, which continues to repeat itself automatically as his heart continues to beat, or as the rains continue to re-give the earth for earth's regivings. This love principle is slowly being applied in industry. Even where it is applied only in part or as good policy, it is giving wonderful returns in the dollars, which may still be the motive back of the practice. The practice of rhythmic balanced interchange as a policy alone will unquestionably bring back more dollars, but dollars are all it will bring. The treasures of heaven can never be acquired by one who seeks the treasures of earth only by using the cloak of heaven. Ethics alone or goodness alone, no matter what the service of man are, for which ethics and goodness are applied, will not constitute greatness in a man or in an industry. Higher wages or even profit sharing are often voted merely as good policy for making more money. These principles bring more money, for they are for the betterment of man and must, under the law, bring returns in kind, but the returns are only in kind and no more, for if love alone is not the motive, love will not be returned in addition to dollars. The workings of universal law in respect to such transactions are clearly set forth in the divine Iliad, in chapter 6, verses 8 to 13 in the Book of Desire as follows. Quote, "Verily I say, he who giveth in my name storeth up great riches in the rhythms of heaven, which are as immortal as the soul seed of his self is immortal. But he who taketh riches in his own name, giving not of his self to me, to void the greed of his self-taking, gathers not to himself but riches which are as mortal as the clay of his earth self is mortal." Things alone of earth, which man desires, are but things of earth to be returned to earth with bones of him. But things of earth, heaven blessed by me, are as eternal in the immortality of his self-recording soul as light of me is eternal. He who desireth riches of earth alone, denying me in him, shall dwell in outer darkness of his own making until he shall desire me strongly. Even to him will I give all he asketh without stinting, yes, and even more. But he, having more than all he sought, will have naught but worthless dross of his earth desire. And darkness will enshroud him. No light will there be in his eyes, nor will he know love. Having desired the dark without my light, he will have but acquired the dark. Unquote. The ideal of the new age is one world, one people. It will be many generations before that ideal can seem to have the possibility of consummation. The race is still too new. We are still in our barbarian state of taking by the power of might over right. Democracy is not 200 years old. Freedom is but a concept in the throes of expression. Rulers of empires owned their people, to exploit them as they willed, even to kill them as they willed. Races and languages are too many and too separative. Such a condition assures disunity. In the millennia to come, there will be but one race and one language upon the face of the earth, and the beginnings of that have been assured and precipitated by the shrinkage of distances which have made the whole world next-door neighbors. One world can only come through strong men throughout the world demonstrating the love principle, by living it and teaching it. We are not producing strong, righteous men in our governmental bodies. When the fires of freedom burned strongly, we bred statesmen to whom patriotism, freedom, and love of country were more than their lives. Men like Washington, Franklin, Jefferson, Paine, and Lincoln were not being produced in these decadent days. Such men govern people for the people. Instead of such righteous and patriotic statesmen, we are producing such men as Hitler, Mussolini, and Franco, who use their offices for their expression of personal power. Politics has taken the place of statesmanship and patriotism. Moral and ethic decadence in a world government is as marked as it is in the fine arts. It should be the supreme desire of governments, heads of industry and education, as well as parents, to produce great men, great patriots, statesmen, philosophers, musical, artistic, literary, and scientific geniuses, to stem the tide of moral and mental disintegration, which is lowering world culture. Only a renaissance of human genius will lift the standards of civilization to higher moral, mental, and spiritual standards. Edward Markham says, "In vain we build the city if we do not also build the man." Civilization must obey the law of love in order to endure. It must find balance and the knowledge necessary to retain balance. It might be well to review man's life purposes and desires in simple postulates and axioms for the purpose of building a concept of a balanced civilization. First postulate. Man lives in two universes, the physical universe of sensing, as manifested by his body and body needs, and the spiritual universe of knowing, as manifested by his desire to seek inspiration from the light within himself for the purpose of becoming co-creator with God. Axiom. Man and God are one, to the extent in which man knows God in him. He is God and has his omnipotent power. Second postulate. Man lives on two planes, the idealistic, or intellectual plane of concept, and the physical plane of the materialization of his concept. Axiom. In order to create, man must have inspired knowledge of cause from God and information concerning effect of cause from man. A balanced education should be one in which knowledge of cause and information concerning effect are equal. Third postulate. Man's whole life is spent in thinking his knowledge into form through action, and resting in order to repeat his thinking and acting. Axiom. The standard of civilization is the sum total of every man's knowing, thinking, and acting. Fourth postulate. Man and his environment are the product of his thinking. They are what he made them. Their forms are the images of his conceptions. Conceptions are spiritual. They are cosmic. Conceptions of idea are never produced. Forms of product are physical. Physical forms of spiritual idea are alone produced. Axiom. Cosmic man is transcendent. The product of inspired cosmic man is alone enduring. The product of physical man is transient. Fifth postulate. Man desires the omnipotent power of intellectual supremacy and the use of that power in creating himself and his environment. Axiom. Man's desire to create can be fulfilled only through the power of knowledge extended to man by God. Man has no other power. He who desires to create enduring things must knowingly work with God. Sixth postulate. Man seeks two kinds of possessions: physical possessions, which he creates from materials borrowed from the earth for the use of his body, which must be returned to the earth with his body, and spiritual possessions, which are eternal and cumulative during his entire unfoldment. Axiom. The measure of a man's greatness is the measure of his knowledge and practice of God's law of love, of his good or bad judgment in relation to his thinking and his acting, and of the balance he sustains while acquiring his physical and mental possessions. Seventh postulate. Culture is the measure of man's spiritual and intellectual status, and his environment is the measure of his culture. Culture is the basis of all courtesy, manners, consideration for others, good taste, civility, poise, emotional control, and all personal expressions in ethics and human relations. Axiom. A progressive civilization is one in which the qualities of civil human relations are in the ascendant. Prosperity, happiness, and peace are dependent upon civil ascendancy, spiritual and intellectual advancement, and cultural growth. Eighth postulate. Man's measure of culture, prosperity, happiness, and peace is registered in his environment. Environment is the material evidence of a standard or ideal. A village, town, city, or nation reflects its ideals in its environment. Axiom. The material of environment is the only product of industry. Ninth postulate. Ideals are born of inspiration. Ideals reflect divinity within us. The higher the ideal, the higher the standards of civilization. The higher the standards of civilization, the more beautiful the environment. Axiom. Beauty is the symbol of love, balance, truth, and the orderliness of law. Beauty is the keynote from which the octaves of the symphony of creation are extended in interchanging light of God's thinking as expression of his knowing. 10th postulate. Beauty is the only product of the arts. Science is the catalyst which binds art to industry. Religion is the science of spiritual expression in human relations. Conclusion. A perfect civilization is one in which art, science, religion, and industry are equalized as the result of balanced thought and action. And that, my friends, is the end of Volume 1 of the Message of the Divine Iliad. That was the 10th lecture in Part 2. And this book is by Walter Russell. There is a Part 3, and it's questions answered from all of the lectures. So I'm going to skip that part. I would... It's question Q&As from all of the lectures, which is really cool that they included in this book. I would just, for Part 3, I'm not going to read it here, but I would suggest that if you are interested in reading that, look for a copy of Volume 1 and 2 of The Message of the Divine Iliad by Walter Russell. I think this is an original pressing. I think the last pressing might have been in 79, but I think that there has been a more recent pressing in trade paperback. So you might be able to find that. This one is signed. I have 2 copies that are signed by Walter Russell of volume 1 and 2. But anyway, it's the most recent pressing. Let me see. I believe it's by their foundation, Walter and Leo Russell's foundation. Yes. Copyright 1971 by the University of Science and Philosophy. And this was originally written in 1948 by Walter Russell. So if you go to philosophy.org, that is their website. You can order it straight from there, or you might be able to find some copies on Amazon or eBay. But at any rate, I shall next start with volume 2 of the Divine Iliad the next time I come on. Thanks. Please like, share, and subscribe. I appreciate it. It helps to grow my channel. Thanks.